Hello and welcome to the Business of Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Eric Rosenberg. Over the years, I've had the privilege of helping businesses in the meetings and event industry grow and succeed. And I'm excited to share that experience with you. If you feel alone and overwhelmed, and if you're looking to take your business to the next level, improve your strategy and sales, and connect with like minded professionals, you are in the right place. I invite you to visit eventbusinessformula.com and join our community of event business owners dedicated to exponential growth. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meeting podcast. Today is a special day for me because I have the opportunity to speak with an amazing person. She's a mentor, not only for me, but for hundreds, if not thousands of people. She's an amazing leader in the industry. She's done so many different things. Today, she's the president of Carnival Cruise Line. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Christine Duffy. Christine, I'm so happy to speak with you today.
Oh, Eric, the pleasure is mine. It's so good to see you again and to reflect back on our early days when we first met and, of course, became very good friends.
Absolutely. And then your other life before
my other life before the cruise industry, yes.
You've had an amazing career. You've been the president of McGettigan, president of Marriott, president of Cruise Line International Association, president of Carnival Cruise Line. You've done so many great things in your life. You've been recognized now by Forbes 50 over 50. You were inducted in the Hall of Fame of Cruise Line last year with an amazing dinner with a lot of friends that were there to support you. How do you see your journey, and what is your journey, and how did you get into the industry for those who, I don't know how, but would not know about you?
Well, I would say I've had a very unconventional path that really started because of my heritage. My mother is French, from France. She's the only member of her family that came to the US. So my sister was born in France. So I had the opportunity and privilege of spending a lot of time in Europe with my French family, visiting, traveling, and experiencing life and in a different culture. So from very, very young age, I knew I wanted to have a career in travel. And at that time, the most exciting thing seemed to be if I could be an international flight attendant. My best girlfriend's sister was a TWA flight attendant, and I was determined that that was the best way to see the world. And so I interviewed with Pan Am. I made it to the final rounds of interview. And, of course, I knew there was a height requirement, but I didn't realize how strict they were. And I'm 2 inches too short to be a flight attendant. And so I was turned down. And so the next best thing for me was to become a travel agent. And so I took a job in Center City, Philadelphia at Rose and Bluth Travel as the receptionist. And then I went down the street to McGettigan's and became a retail travel agent. And then McGettigan shifted from retail leisure travel into corporate meetings and incentives, particularly for the pharmaceutical industry, which at the time was quite different than it is today. It wasn't consolidated. So there was lots of pharmaceutical companies in the Northeast region, Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York. And we grew a business really from nothing to a sizable organization. And over 20 years, I went from being a retail travel agent to becoming president of McGettigan. And then we sold the business in 2001 to Marriott. And 3 years later, Steve Marriott called and asked if I would like to come and be CEO of Marriott's Travel Company, which was obviously an amazing opportunity, being the first woman ever at Marriott's, a 110-year-old company, to lead their organization, which is really the largest corporate meetings, events, and incentive travel business. And so, throughout that time, I really was committed to the meetings and events industry. I learned so much through the work many of us did together in that era at MPI, Meetings Professional International. Lots of volunteer time, lots of time on the board, ultimately became chair at MPI and was recognized and inducted into the Hall of Leaders there. We started the Women's Leadership Initiative. So really for me, that was such a great foundation to then what led me to where I am today.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember those stories that we probably cannot talk about the breakfast show at the European conference where a lot of laughter, but I always share the story so you can validate that I'm not making this up. In the board meeting in Paris, when I was presenting about the global strategy for MPI for the first time, and I wanted to make the point of all the Americans who already had their IRS form prepared in Bangalore. And I said, there's 250,000 households in the United States and that have their, and I remember you stop, you lean it to Sandra Riggins, who was chief of staff. And then I stopped and said, Christine, what's wrong? And he said, what did you say? I said 250,000 households in the United States. I said, Eric, household. And that was my pronunciation, right?
Well, I would say this, your pronunciation has gotten a whole lot better today than it was when you originally said it, which sounded very much like a different word than household. And since you and I both speak French, and I grew up with my mother, who still has a very heavy French accent, you don't pronounce your H's very well. But I would say you get a star for improvement on the pronunciation of households.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you've done so many things in your life. And as we all know, nobody does it alone. So who were the people that influenced you, that made a difference in your life?
Well, certainly, as I said, my mother and the opportunities, that I had growing up, frankly, with them, my parents got divorced when I was 15, and my mom was a single mother with two teenage daughters and struggled. And seeing her work so hard, I wanted to be independent. I was ambitious, and I wanted a career that was exciting. But at the same time, I still wanted, family and children. And so, fortunately, while I got married young, I was able to do all of that. And I have a husband that I've been married to for 43 years next month,
Wow.
who has just supported me throughout my career journey and all the changes and things that we did. And two fantastic children, and my son is now married with two little granddaughters that I have that are so precious. And I've always believed that having the support of your family, which is what really matters at the end of the day, made it so much easier and made it possible for me to do all of the things that I've had the pleasure to do. At the same time, I've been a big believer that it's important that you integrate your family and your work life. There was a lot of discussion back in the day about work-life balance, and I think we agreed in many ways there is no such thing as this balance.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's all work, sometimes that's just what we have to do and be focused, and then other times you have to prioritize your family. And so it is, how do we integrate these two things that gives us
Totally.
balance and perspective? And so it was always important to me that my work friends, many of my colleagues, that my family got to know them. And so you, as an example, my husband, Andrew, and our
Yeah.
children. And I just think it helps when you're, running a business or starting a company and you're working that your family is there, but they know when you say, hey, I'm going to MPI, hey, I'm going to this event, or I'm going to go see Eric Rosenberg, that, oh, they know who that is. Not the old way of compartmentalizing, right? I'm never going to talk about my family at work, and I'm never going to talk about work with my family. And so that for me has been at the foundation of what I believe has supported me. And then, of course, the people who believed in me, who put me in positions that were way beyond anything that I thought I would ever accomplish or achieve, starting with Mr. McGettigan at McGettigan's and the family that gave me the opportunities, hired me in the first place, promoted me over time, and watching the values that they had and how they, with the culture that we had. John Pino, who was really a visionary before his time,
Yes.
started Starsight, and he still has iMeet, and just a tremendous human being and a phenomenal leader. And then, frankly, Steve Maritz, who, acquired McGettigan and 3 years later calls and says, "Hey, I want you to be CEO at Maritz Travel Company." I remember thinking, is he talking to me? Maritz, for many of us that grew up in the industry, Maritz was always the biggest and, 110-year-old company when I started. So to have the opportunity and to learn from Steve, and then following that to shift over to the cruise industry. But also, I want to emphasize how much value, not only from MPI, but US Travel, Roger Dow, the leaders and the friends that people I still call friends, that I was able to network and learn from. Hugh Lee, Georgia Gell, who, these were people that we served together on the board. Dave Johnson, who supported the Women's Leadership Initiative. The importance of networking outside of your business or your job or your specific company, to me, has immeasurable value. And I still believe in that today. And obviously, Arnold Donald, who hired me into the job I have now, I am a very unconventional choice for the job that I have today. Given I never worked for a public company, I was never a CFO. And I manage an organization with 50,000 employees in multi-billion-dollar revenue business. And I've been in this role for 10 years. So it's always about people believing in you, perhaps more than what you yourself believe you're capable of doing. And those are all people who gave me the opportunities that I had over the years.
That's wonderful. I was listening to you and thinking about MPI, and if it wasn't for you and for Angie, I probably would not have be willing to continue this leadership path. You're amazing. But a testament to who you are is when you were inducted last year into the Hall of Fame. All the people that came and all the people from your previous life that
Yes.
came to support you. Christine, you're an amazing leader, but you're very straightforward. You're not afraid to tell it like it is, which personally I love. What are the type of qualities you're looking when you're surrounding yourself with different people? And do you have like your favorite interview question?
First, I hate interviewing. I really don't like interviewing. I think that's a unique skill to be a great interviewer and to be able to judge talent. I'm somebody that kind of in the first 2 minutes, and that's not always fair. So for me, it's more, why does somebody want the job? Why do you want this job? And about the talent, I think the talent you surround yourself with is all about what is the skill set that you bring to the role. And how do you ensure that you're surrounding yourself with people that are not just like you? And the natural gravitation in an interview is to feel a connection to someone who is like you and
Mm.
somebody that you can relate to. And that becomes a slippery slope if everybody you surround yourself with is just like you. So trying to keep very clear and have a very high sense of self-awareness of what is it that your skill set is, what is it that your strength is, but what are your blind spots, what are the things that you don't really like to do, that this person, that is their skill set, that's their strength, that's where they're going to focus. That requires you to be very clear-eyed about what your own gaps are, having the clarity to do that. And over time, it may also change, because I do believe you need different leaders for different times. And the pace of change in business, technology, culture, consumer changes rapidly. And at some point, maybe the most important thing is to know what the leadership or the team that I needed 5 years ago. Maybe I need something different today. Maybe I'm not the right person for the next 5 years. So I think it's not a static thing.
Absolutely. And that's interesting what you're saying about surrounding yourself with people that do the things that you not necessarily like to do. As you know, I was raised in Belgium, and it was always know your strength, know your weaknesses, and work on your weaknesses. Until one day I thought, no, I don't want to work on my weaknesses. I want to work on my strength and hire people whose strength are my weaknesses.
Exactly. That's well said.
And so
Better said.
for small business owners, it's the same. Especially resources are different. And it's really understanding what you're good at, what is needed for your business, and surround yourself with the right people. And on that line of thought, when the number of unexpected events that is happening in the world, from a volcano erupting in Iceland to a strike somewhere that you have to react. So in your case, you had a lot of challenges, obviously, with all the responsibility you had. You had to testify before Congress. You had to face an historical pandemic. So how do you manage crisis? And what's your advice for anyone listening, how they can be ready to face unexpected events, which in any case in your life will happen?
Well, I think a lot of it is about, because really for me, the first crisis that was had professional impact was 9/11. And that was when I first became very involved with the US Travel Association and understood the importance of being out there, right, with a loud voice of why continuing to travel after 9/11 was so important and not to be stopped. Freedom to travel was so important. And we learned a lot coming out of 9/11, and the industry rebounded very quickly. But you compare that to what happened then in 2008 when the financial crisis happened and President Obama said people shouldn't be taking trips to Las Vegas. A lot of unintended consequences that came from that statement impacted our business at Marriott tremendously, but the hotels in Vegas, the resorts, people that relied, corporations that were using meetings to train, to communicate, to collaborate, everything stopped. And so we were back in Washington again. And one of the things that I learned in both of those examples, one where it became a point of pride to be traveling right after 9/11. The other was to say, these are not unnecessary trips or boondoggles. There are business objectives, communication, face-to-face meetings. But what I learned is, and actually it was somebody in Washington who said, remember, you can't just show up when there's a crisis. You have to be telling your story all the time. And I think that applies not just to crisis, but to how you operate in business every day, whether you are a business owner and making sure you're in front of your customers, you're in front of your employees, you're telling your story. Why is what I do important? What is it that I'm accomplishing? And that in some way, when you're in a crisis, just becomes accelerated. And if you weren't doing all of that to the stakeholders that matter, showing up after a crisis and trying to explain to people why what you do matters is much more difficult. And that's what we were faced with in 2008. We had not, as an industry, done a very good job of walking the halls. And, members of Congress change all the time. Somebody said it's like the high school basketball team. So you can't wait for the crisis to make your stakeholders aware of what you're doing, why it should matter to them. I think we did a great job as an industry coming together quickly, but it was after the fact, and we had to react. Yeah. And I think since then, we have become much more proactive as an industry, telling our story to the right stakeholders. Now, as I shifted to the cruise industry and we faced some very serious incidents, I was able to use those lessons and apply it in our business to, there was a big lack of education around all of the safety, all of the protocols, all of the things that the industry does. But if people don't know that you're doing it, if you're not telling your story to the right people and communicating it over, people don't know. You cannot assume that people know what you're doing or why it matters. So that was something I was able to really do when I had to testify before Congress. And ultimately, how those crises were handled is what gave me the opportunity for the role that I have today as president of Carnival. Now, what I didn't know was we were going to face, I would face, and the industry would face, and maybe the world would face the biggest crisis we've ever seen in our lifetime, which was the pandemic. And the cruise industry, we were shut down for 16 months. So all of those crew members, all of the 27 ships I had when COVID happened, the responsibility to get all of those crew members home. And we had some of those crew members on our ships for a year because their countries wouldn't take them back. So that was a crisis on so many levels beyond what any of us had ever experienced. As they say, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger.
Yeah.
So I had built up some muscle in dealing with crisis. One of the biggest things I take from the pandemic as a learning is when you're in a crisis, everybody wants you to make decisions. Everybody wants certainty. And crisis creates uncertainty. And everybody wants you to make a decision. And it's easy as a leader, you're in charge, you want to give people answers. My learning was don't make decisions before you have to. And in the pandemic, things were changing all the time. Nobody really knew what was going to happen. So to make big decisions, to make promises that you couldn't keep because we weren't in control. In our case, the CDC was in control.
Yeah.
And having to manage but the key in any crisis is communication. Open, honest, transparent, consistent, and frequency. So I got tired of listening to myself, but every week we were communicating via video to 50,000 crew members around the world. And when we came back to the operation after the crisis, I was shocked at how many people told me that they would gather around their computers with their families to listen to what I was going to say. Even when I had nothing new to say, there's a level of comfort for people in a crisis hearing from leadership, even when we don't have anything new to say.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Now, you're talking about leadership and what leaders, that people expect leaders to make decisions. And we were talking about the past, about work-life integration. You cannot mention your family, now it's changed. When you look at a leader, I would say it's okay to say, I don't know. That's also the honesty.
Yes.
But too many times, and I don't know if it's cultural, too many times people expect you to have an answer or to make up an answer. It looks like if you're a leader, you cannot say, I don't know.
I agree. I say I don't know a lot, but you do feel a pressure as a leader when people ask a question that you have an answer. But the truth is, leaders don't always have the answers. And it's better to be authentic and transparent. I also believe that people are much more resilient than we give them credit for. And so trying to put pretty up a story or make rose-colored glasses and make people see through that. Authenticity, approachability, and being real with people. I think that is what people gravitate to from a leader. That is what people are motivated, because at the end of the day, it builds trust. And trust is the most important thing in any relationship. Do I
Absolutely.
trust what you're saying? So if I ask you a question and you make up an answer because you don't want to tell me that you don't know, it doesn't build trust. And people, we don't give them enough credit for their resilience, their ability to handle bad news. They just want the truth as best we know it today.
Yes, true. That's best that we know today. Absolutely. And the way I look at it is also because it's probably more a feminine aspect, and thanks to the fact that there's more women in leadership, it's okay to do that. Now, you mentioned it earlier on. You started the Women Leadership Initiative with MPI. You know, I have three amazing daughters, and I brainwashed them from birth with having on the fridge this quote from Sheryl Sandberg: "If anybody tell you that you bossy, tell them that you have executive leadership skills." So I don't know when was the MPI Women Initiative, in especially the meetings and event industry with 80% of women. Have you seen any positive evolution, and how do you see now the role of women in leadership, or is it still the same fight, or things are getting better?
Look, I think the reality, when I think back to that time, it was in the 90s. And I remember going to the board meeting to pitch to the MPI board that we should have a women's leadership initiative at MP. Actually, the vision was that it was be across all of the industry. So PCMA, ASAE, right? Everyone. And I remember at the time, the CEO, it was all, by the way, white men around the boardroom. And the CEO at the time, Ed Griffin, said, why do we need a women's leadership initiative when most of the people working in the industry are women? And that was the whole point. We were the majority of people working in the industry, but women were by far the minority leading large companies, other than people who had small businesses. And it was Dave Johnson, who was on the board, who has 4 daughters, who stepped up first and said, I want my daughters to be able to sit around this table. And Wyndham stepped up with money, and then United Airlines stepped up with money. And from there, we moved forward. Now, here we are, 25 years later, we're still having this conversation. It maybe it's a little bit, have things gotten better? Yes. Is there more to do? Yes. Will there always be more to do? Unfortunately, I think so. Because, there is still a narrative about strong women. And you have to be pretty tough and direct if you're going to be a president or CEO or senior executive in big companies. And, there is always this edge of the women who maybe they are overcompensating, maybe they're not. But it is still a conversation. Now, I hope by the time, and your girls are now off in college, and so hopefully that generation, I do think men are also far more of the younger generation are far more accepting of women, just as they are much more perhaps involved in, many of them are stay-at-home dads now. I mean, that was also a new concept 25 years ago. So we've certainly made progress. It's certainly, evolved in the right way, but we still see things in the news, as you know, that would put into question, really not done yet.
Absolutely. That reminds me of Françoise Giroud, which you might have heard as a writer, a French writer, who was talking about the rights that women were getting in France. And she said, you will only need one generation to lose it. So there will be a fight that we have to do all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. You transitioned from meetings and events to the cruise industry. Can you take us back at that moment when you are offered to go with Clea and to change industry? What's going on in your mind? Are you, excited, something new, or are you wondering what's happening, and what were the factors that made you decide to do that?
I think I was just ready for something new. I had had an amazing, obviously 20 years at McGettigan, 10 years at Marriott, and I wanted to get back to the East Coast, which is where I'm from, and our family wanted to get back. And this was an opportunity to be in Washington, D.C., and I had gotten that experience coming out of the 9/11 and then 2008. And so to be in a role representing the global cruise industry as a leader of the trade association was fascinating to me. And it was the best education I could have gotten for the job that I ultimately was offered in 2014. And so we had some big crises, but again, you learn, right? What doesn't
Yeah.
kill us makes us stronger. And I learned so much during the 4 years that I ran CLIA that really prepared me in a much better way for the transition I've made to the role that I have today.
And you have to completely change the industry and led the industry and led Carnival Cruise Line. It's going to be 10 years now that you've done that. Is there anything that taught that you're surprised you discover, or something that you wanted to accomplish that you haven't yet? And how do you look into the future?
Well, I will say this. I think the cruise industry is one of the most complicated businesses you can run. Because if you think about it, we are operating like an airline with high levels of regulation, high levels of technical, these ships, and you know the size of our ships today, our largest, the ship that we're building, the first one will be delivered in 2029, carries 8,000 guests and 2,000 crew members. And you think about having crew members from over 120 different countries. They're living together, they're working together on a ship.
Wow.
This week is unfortunately very busy because we have hurricanes. So I have responsibility for 30 ships, most of which are in the US, but I have responsibility also for our Australia business. And so whether it's hurricanes, storms, tsunamis, or technical things that break that require us to cancel a cruise or modify an itinerary, there's always something going on. And you still have all of the traditional work that you'd be doing if you were operating a resort. We have spa and pool and specialty dining and room accommodations and apps, and we're taking people to different destinations and shore excursions and retail business and shops and selling fine jewelry. So these have become truly like floating cities. And so the level of complexity in our business is quite high. The level of value to the consumer is great. The level of people who experience cruising and become cruisers for life is growing. And the opportunity to really embrace multi-generational travel, where you see families, generations traveling together on a cruise as an easy way to be together and for people to see the world. It can be intimidating to get on a plane and fly to Australia or fly to Japan on your own. When you're on a cruise ship, you have your home, and your home moves from place to place. So for me, it's a fascinating industry. And while I've been here 10 years, the amount of change that we've experienced in these 10 years, first and foremost for me, was focusing on culture and our people, making sure I had the right team in place. And then very quickly, we turned to the pandemic. And I was very proud that Carnival Cruise Line, coming out of the pandemic, we were the first cruise line to have every ship back in operation. We have grown our capacity double digit since coming out of the pandemic. We have more ships, large ships coming. We're developing private destinations. Celebration Key will open in July of 2025. It's a $600 million development project. So the level of capital investment in new ships, in private destinations, and the growth overall, again, it's never a dull moment. I'm always learning. And I'm always learning from our people that are closest to the customer and to the operation.
That's fascinating. And you said 8,000 guests and 2,000 staff on a boat. Wow.
On a ship.
On a ship, sorry.
Because
yes,
remember,
that's my
ship
English.
can hold a boat. A ship, you can put a boat on a ship.
And I don't know the difference between the two with my non-English
Well,
native words.
look at the size of a ship.
I am sorry. I will. But
No
it's
worries.
fascinating what you do. Christine, I would spend hours listening and talking to you, and I'm so appreciative of the time. I know you're extremely busy, and I want to thank you for the support that you gave me in my life and what you allow me to experience that changed my life. So I'm extremely grateful for that. You never know who's listening. So my last question is there a dream, something, whether it's personal, business, is there some of your dream that if anybody's listening, you say, I can help her with that. What would that be?
Well, I think for me at this stage in my career, in my life, I'm looking at your book. Before it's too late, I want to make sure that I really am able to spend more time with our family, probably more time on the ground. When people ask me where I live, I say American Airlines. So I'm looking forward to whatever happens next. And I'm a believer that, I don't exactly know what that will look like, but the universe will help me solve it. But it will include spending more time with my family and especially with my beautiful granddaughters and children.
Wonderful. Christine, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you, Eric. It's wonderful to see you. I'm so, so proud of you and all that you've accomplished in your life and your beautiful family and frankly the courage that it took for you to uproot your family and your life and move from Belgium to the US and the life that you've made here and what you've done personally and professionally. So I'm so very proud of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Business of Meeting podcast. I hope you found today's episode valuable. If you enjoyed the show, the most important thing you can do is leave a review and share it with your colleagues. It really helps spread the word. I truly appreciate your support. And if you're ready to take your business to the next level, don't forget to visit eventbusinessformula.com to learn more about how we are helping even business owners like you. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.